welcome again to Theories of Reality. No, that's next term. If you're looking for a class at the same time, though, Tuesday, Thursday, 1 to 2:50, I'm doing Theories of Reality in this very classroom, similar format. Actually, very similar format. A little more, I think a little more reading. I've been using a lot of video with this, so if you do the evaluations, if you like that, you don't like that. One of the things I've been noticing is that the scores on the tests seem really good in this class compared to my other classes. And I think part of it is this idea is I'd like you to learn a few things well rather than like throwing a ton of stuff at you and overwhelm you with information, have you trying to figure out like, what do I have to know for the test, and then have you like just get some of it. And you guys have done really well in like getting like the fallacies. On the last test, you guys did really well on those. You know, I gave you like definitions of all of them on the handouts, and I don't give you a lot of other stuff to read. I'm gonna give you busy work, and I used to do lots of I don't know, like drills and a bunch of homework. You have to identify these fallacies, and I've tried to go a little light on the reading and focus on like critical inquiry and really getting like drilling down deep on these ideas like, well, what is critical thinking? How do I apply it? How do I recognize these fallacies? And then thinking about things that you people deal with in their sort of non-academic life, like religion, like ethics, and today like the news and politics. So the final, which is going to open on Thursday at 3, and it'll be ready on time this time. So so at Thursday, actually I think at 4 o'clock is what I have in the syllabus. Give myself a little time to tinker with it after the last class. But it'll be based on thinking critically about religion, about ethics, and about news and politics, and maybe a little bit about thinking critically about your life is just sort of our last class, and talking about like thinking critically about your life in a practical way. Because often people will have all these like really well thought out theories about and sort of high level understanding of things in science or about academic stuff, or even about politics. But when it comes to their own particular life, there's this big gap between what they say their values are and their goals are, and what they're actually doing in their life, right? So there's something to think about that. And this has a lot to do with like being self-consistent and setting goals and thinking about like things like your health and or your money, and then the goals you have for those, and then like what you're doing in your day-to-day life. Okay, but let's talk about news and politics. So I don't know if we have anything left to talk about with the religion. Was there anything from last time that people want to mention? All right, well, let's just start fresh with the politics. Let me just, I'm going to upload something real quick. I'll say just as a reminder, so this is critical thinking. It's more of a process class. So what we're attempting to do here is give you sort of some tools for thinking about things. So teaching you how to think instead of what to think. And even though maybe there's some content in some of the things that we've discussed, and there's some content, I think, particularly in like talking about religion, you think about people will spout these things all the time. People say, oh, there are many roads to God. And instantly when you hear that, you should think, well, how do you know that, right? How do you know one religion isn't true and you follow one of these other religions, maybe you're going to go straight to hell? How do you know that some religions might not just be cooked up by somebody as a scam to make money? How do you know all religions are like that, right? And then like how, if you're going to try to grade religions, if you're trying to figure out, well, which of these religions seems to be most likely to be true, if any of them, like how would you go about doing that? And And that, or if someone says, well, you just have to have faith, right? And they say, well, there's faith, which deals with the spiritual, and there's reason, which deals with the material. And you can't mix the two, right? And there's a lot of different ways to approach that. But one thing you might say is, well, okay, well, which religion should I have faith in? I mean, you have religion in your particular religion, but how do you know that your religion is right and everybody else's religion is wrong? Well, it seems like you have to go back to reason. So I think John Locke had this saying where he said, if something's a revelation, then it's true. But whether it's a revelation or not, reason must judge. So Locke was kind of I'd call him like a liberal Christian, and his idea was that as you're trying to figure out, well, is this something that is revealed by God? Should I accept this as an authority on spiritual or moral matters, or telling me the truth about God, or is it a mistake, or is it a product of culture? Or is it a human creation, or is it of divine origin? And in order to test those claims, you got to use your mind. There's no like shortcut where you just sort of just believe, because then the question is like, believe in what? And so then it comes down to, well, you need to think critically about religion the same thing you think critically about science, about politics, about any of these things. You can't just check your brain at the door when it comes to matters of faith, that you have to use your mind to figure out what's true and what's not. And critical thinking, again, its basis is trying to figure out what's true and what's false. So that's kind of what we're doing here. And although, again, we're talking about some subject matter, it's sort of it's grist for our mill. So, and I try to include a lot of different information. One of the things when we talked about, like, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, isn't faith the opposite of critical thinking? Because it's just trusting in something because of reasons, and critical thinking is breaking things down and coming to a conclusion after you've analyzed it objectively.
So it depends on, like, there's different ways of conceiving faith. So one way of thinking about faith is a sort of special way of knowing different from reason, where you have like a conviction that something's true without having to use logic and the rules of evidence. And I think that they would say it's not that you don't think. A person of faith might say, well, it's not that you don't use your reason at all, it's just that reason only takes you so far. And this idea that reason sort of takes you on the precipice, and then you have to take that leap of faith. And that requires trust. And I think that their argument, this is kind of like a Kierkegaardian argument. Soren Kierkegaard is the guy who sort of came up with this idea of the leap of faith. And he would say that, reason takes you so far, but then, relating to God isn't like something you can treat in a cool, objective manner, that you need to be subjective about it, because God is a person and you have relationships with persons. And so he would argue that it's sort of like a romantic relationship, right? You'd say, if your significant other says, I love you, and you say, well, what's your proof for that, right? You say, oh, I love you too, and you don't like wonder, is my sweetie stepping out on me? Is she messing around, right? You don't like scout, look over their back and scour the credit card statements, break into their email or whatever to try to look for evidence that they might be fooling around behind your back, because that's not trust, right? If you're in a relationship where you're doing that, then something's wrong, right? So the idea is you trust the other person, you don't suspect them. Whereas as the kind of rational approach to religion is an approach of skepticism and suspicion. So that would be the pitch that Kierkegaard might make. Now, what do you think about that? I just take that as this idea that faith is a matter of trusting God, as opposed to your own powers of reasoning. And I'll just add one more thing. And then often it's said, well, in doing so and being skeptical, you're putting yourself over God, saying you get to decide whether God exists or not. It puts you over God, and it says that you're smarter than God. Yeah.
That kind of sounds like, to me, like you have to be obedient in a way.
I suppose what's at issue here is like, if there was a God who's like the creator of the universe and everything, and he created you, then it seems like maybe he deserves some deference and respect. But you see this maybe as kind of a conspiracy of control or something? Is that?
I mean, well, no, you just said that, like, I mean, you just said that if the person thinks that their reason's better than God's or whatever, they think that they're better than God.
Yeah, that you're like smarter than God. You're like that you can judge things more than God thinks. So and this is a common belief, particularly amongst like people who would consider themselves to be. Now, like no religious person uses the term fundamentalist. They don't say I'm a fundamentalist. I mean, maybe they used to, but it's kind of a pejorative term. But like I'll put it this way: people who aren't liberal, in other words, people that really believe their religion in totality and don't try to soft pedal it and don't try to modernize it or make it more hip, that just say this is what I believe based on this tradition that's ancient and sacred. They'll say, well, think of an example. So they'll say this is just this is what our religion teaches. And it conflicts with modern notions, but the modern notions are just wrong. And so your idea is that you know better than God. This is what God said. This is what God revealed. And you think, well, I'm smart because I'm in the 21st century, and I'm going to decide what I like and what I don't like, and I'm the judge, not and I don't like this idea that there's some power over me, and sometimes it's pitched as this idea that people that don't believe, they either sort of have this need to be in control. They're kind of like a control freak, and they hate the idea of somebody being over them, and then maybe the idea that if they had to believe, then they'd have to make a change in their lifestyle, and they're sort of hiding their black heart and secret sins that they don't want to give up because it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Can you actually decide what you believe in though? Like you're not born and then you decide you like the color blue. You just like the color blue.
Yeah.
But it's like with religion, can you decide that you actually believe in a God?
That's a really good question. That's one that we used to go into much detail in the now defunct theories of knowledge class that the college in its wisdom decided to cut. I mean, here's an interesting fact just based on that. So you look at the geographic distribution of religion. So let me see if I can find that. Let me just. Okay. Where's a good one? This one's pretty good, I guess. Try you. Make it big. Where's the key?
No key.
Well, I guess so. I think I can get. There's no labels in the country. That's not helpful either.
There's a good one.
Let me just go back here and let's try this one. Here we go. That's not useful either. Maybe a little bit. Okay, it's just too small. This is all right. So you can see. So Christianity is in the purple, right? So you see. Let me see if I can make this bigger. So Christianity, sub-Saharan Africa, the North America, the Americas, and this is Soviet Union and all of Western Europe. And here's India, Hindu, Buddhism, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, and non-religious was that purple? heck is that? Islam is in the sort of this green color, right?
Yeah.
So if religion really was a choice, wouldn't you expect this to be completely random, or at least more random? Now these are like majorities, so it's not. There are some Christians in China, and there are some Buddhists in America, and there's other religions that show up. But you look at the vast majority of people in Europe are Christians. Why? Well, became the religion of the Roman Empire, and the empire came into Europe, and Europe has the heritage of Western culture, and so they used to be pagans, and then the Roman Empire came in there and Christianized them, and so that's why Western Europe carries on with the Christian tradition that the Roman Empire adopted, and then these colonists came over to North America from France and from Britain. Into Canada and America, and they spread in that they were all Christians, Catholics, and Protestants, and then the Spaniards came and colonized South America and Central America, and they're Catholics, right? So this is why Latin America is all Catholic, and Hinduism pretty much started in India. That's most Indians are Hindus, but Islam started out in Saudi Arabia and moved to the Asia Minor and got into northern India. So I think about 15 or 20% of India is Muslim, and mostly in the northern part of the little peninsula there, or whatever you call this, subcontinent. That's what I was looking for, subcontinent. So, and China is a largely Buddhist. They have a significant atheist population because of the Cultural Revolution and communism, which is an atheistic philosophy. Same thing with Russia. Russia's nominally Christian. The Orthodox Church is there. You can even do this with particular denominations too. The Orthodox Church predominates in Russia. The majority of Christians in America are Protestants because of our Quaker, the Puritans and the Quakers that came in, along with the large Catholic majority. I think about 25% of American Christians are Catholic, and hardly any Orthodox is a small number, whereas in Greece and Russia and Turkey, the majority of Christians are Orthodox Christians. Same thing with Egypt, to the extent that there are any left there. Well, this is all like cultural, historical stuff. But then what comes to you're just trying to decide what religion you're going to be. You're like, most people just go along with what their parents say. So does this mean that religion is sort of something that we don't choose, or it's not under our control to choose? Yeah.
So just to go along with that, Christianity is in our Constitution, and we are fundamentally a Christian country. I mean, we were founded off of Christian beliefs, and like you said last class, that's the reason why we came over here, right?
So the pilgrims that landed at Plymouth Rock, they were people fleeing religious persecution, and lots of the ways the settlers came here because they opposed the institutionalized religions in Europe, and they wanted a place where they could practice their religion as peace. Now, I'll give you an opportunity to revise and extend your remarks about the Christianity being the Constitution. I'll say there's two mentions of religion in the Constitution. One says that there can be no religious test for public office, and the other one says that the Congress can make no law prohibiting can make no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay. So there it seems like it just says religion, it doesn't say anything about Christianity. So basically religion doesn't matter when you're running for office. You can't say, if you're not Christian, you can't run for president. And then you can't, the government can't prevent people from practicing the religion, and they also can't establish a national religion, which is what every other country at the time had, a national religion, and then impose it on people.
But do you agree that Christianity is very influential in the United States, more so than other religions.
Oh, sure, certainly,
Okay,
yeah.
so
It's a dominant
in that
religion.
sense, though, wouldn't you say that it would make more sense to have a country or state in which you didn't have those type of influences, and you would be able to have your own, like, form your own opinion off of that literature?
Well, I mean, how are you going to get rid of it, I suppose, would be the question.
I mean, it's a hypothetical. But I mean, like, it's in, you know, our...
Oh, you know, Mao had some
Star
ideas
Spangled
about that.
Banner, it's in our money, it's in our,
Well, the Star Spangled Banner, I don't know, I mean, people that make, like, artistic and cultural products, they speak out of, like, their beliefs at the time, and it does say in God we trust, but it doesn't say, like, in Christianity, or it doesn't say in Christ we trust. There's always been a kind of like a ceremonial deism that's gone along with the U.S. government, and you have prayer before the opening of Congress, and in God we trust, and all that, and the Pledge of Allegiance and so on.
Why don't we be more open, now that the holidays are coming up, why aren't we more open of, you know, Hanukkah or other, you know, religions? Why are we so focused on the
Well,
consumerism?
it seems we are. I mean, one thing is, like, the majority of people that have a religion are Christians. It's like a cultural festival. It's part of American culture. It's not officially endorsed by the government, although we have federal holidays for Christmas, and the reason those were established is because the majority of people are Christians who had a religion. And then even people that aren't Christians, even atheists love Christmas. And Christmas is also mixed in with a lot of other things besides, like, the Christmas story of the birth of Jesus. There's Santa Claus and the reindeer and jingle bells and the whole idea of the giving gifts. I mean, all that stuff is sort of this parallel thing it's basically a European custom. And so because America is made up of a majority of European immigrants, it's a cultural festival. And the thing is, like, would you care about, like, in India, they'd celebrate Indian festivals there too. They have, like, harvest, they have winter, I'm sure they have some sort of winter festival. There's spring fertility festivals, but I mean, nobody complains about those. So it seems like Americans in particular seem very sensitive to these kind of cultural issues. And I've noticed certainly over the years that people bend over backwards to talk about making sure, to the point that saying Merry Christmas is stigmatized, and because you're not saying Happy Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and Eid al-Fitr and all the different festivals, it's like, well, do people in Japan, do they list, like, all the festivals of all people over the world? Well, no, I'm sure they just, when they have festivals and things, they don't worry about offending people, and part of it because they're a homogeneous society. But I think even societies which are more mixed, it's natural that people who are part of, like, kind of the mainstream of culture to celebrate their festivals and enjoy it and not always worry about offending someone. But, yeah, go ahead.
Well, a couple things to that. First, my experience, the Happy Holidays is stigmatized. I was in Florida, and it's like, oh, say Happy Holidays, and people look at you very sternly, Merry Christmas. It's like, whoa, sorry, didn't mean to offend you. I was just trying to be inclusive. And it seems that, to answer to my remark to your thing about how do you choose, I think you do choose, but like that graph shows, there is a massive influence culturally about, being religious. I think it's very, like, if you're not religious, you're an outsider. 95% of the population of the world believes in some god or another.
Yeah.
And to even, like, as one of the only atheists in my family, it's one of those things that's like, don't talk about that. The rest of us are talking about God. Your opinion is not wanted here. So
and Florida might be like a different situation than Eugene, because Florida's very
much.
But and there, I think people are reacting to this kind of stigma of Merry Christmas, this idea that you should use some generic greeting and avoid saying Merry Christmas. And they get people scowling at them, and so they're going to scowl at you for not saying Merry Christmas and this idea that I don't know, there's something shameful or narrow-minded about like saying Merry Christmas as opposed to Happy Holidays, which is generic and non-offensive. But I could certainly see the other way around too. That people. So you have the kind of, I don't know, that there's like the attempt to stifle and be more inclusive, and then there's like the reaction from the people who feel like they're being stifled, and it's bad at Christmas, right? Yeah, Zoe.
So on the point of whether or not we choose our religion, I think on some level we do choose our religion, but we are heavily influenced by the influences from our formative years.
Yeah.
So like when you develop all of the beliefs that you have on, say, like money or a family life or religion, huge points like that, those are pretty much all developed by the time that you're 10 years old. And then you can build on those beliefs, but almost always you will find that people are consistent with what they were taught within the first 10 years of their life. So to no fault of anybody's, that's just kind of in our natural programming, that's how we learn. And then how we evolve from there is a little bit more personalized. And then on the point of Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, other countries weren't founded on the basis of religious freedom. I think that's why it isn't an issue, because you don't find that in other places in the world. Even in different countries in Africa or different segments of Thailand, where they celebrate vastly different things, you still wouldn't be put in that position. And there's also a lot more segregation, like within the countries, where they are having these celebrations. So something that's going on in North Thailand isn't going to be broadcast to southern Thailand.
Yeah.
And here, that's not true. Christmas is a nationwide, in-your-face thing that you cannot get away from, no matter where you are in our massive country. And like on top of that, even though it has become commercialized in modern day America, just like All Hallows Eve for Halloween or St. Valentine's Day that we now celebrate, Christmas is still founded on a Judeo-Christian religion.
Oh,
and
sure.
that's something that, like, even though our country was founded on, it was founded by Christian people. The Christian people believed that we should be able to choose our own religions from there.
Yeah.
So I can see why people would be a little bit more sensitive in America as opposed to other countries, because it is part of our rights to not have that not shoved in our face, but to have our own personality and freedom of what we do and do not want to expose ourselves to, basically.
There's many countries around the world though that have a religious freedom now.
Nowadays, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean.
Some, usually not to the
but, I
extent
mean,
of
But
here.
not to
Not-
the extent
maybe
that
not-
America has.
No, but definitely not. But I mean, there are certain countries all around the world. I mean, you look at like Western Europe that have similar religious freedoms, and so I mean, I think that us definitely moving, I think that like moving geographically definitely affected us a little bit differently. I think that Europe is definitely allowed to reflect on their religious past a little bit differently, and maybe that's why they're a little bit more liberal and progressive in their religious thoughts. I don't know.
But you still, even there, you have like parties with names like Christian Democrat. Like
Right.
nobody's like going to change the parties. Probably soon though. But
And even Great Britain, even though like it's mainly probably secular these days, has an official state religion in the form of the Church of England.
And they still have
Yeah.
public school, or not public schools, sorry. Most people in Western Europe still go to private schools, private institutions, and they're constantly taught, religion at a young age, but yet we're not here in the US for religious freedom. I think that's interesting. I think I'm a big believer that you should be taught it just so you are able to like make up your own opinion, not just like, hey, focus on Christianity or just focus on one certain religion. I just find it super interesting that we don't do that.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
that
we have all this religious freedom.
I think that there's worries about like teaching how you teach it and be even-handed in the schools, and so a lot of schools will just sort of say, hands off. Yeah, Zoe, did you have something?
There's also a, I will say in especially European countries, there is a history of evolution throughout, like, their religious beliefs, where we don't have that in America. We moved from Europe and founded our own country based on ideals that we have kept consistent since then. In Europe, that's not how it was. Europe was resettled over and over again by different colonies, the Romans, the Greeks, all of that. And throughout all of those different changes, they brought in different religions. That's never happened in America. So it might be a little bit more consistent nowadays for them to become more liberal with their religious beliefs and say it's a little bit more open. But in America, we are immovable. You know what I mean? That's part of our
I suppose we have, so you had the Puritans' beliefs were very different from like evangelicals' beliefs today, or certainly like the mainline Protestant churches. So even though maybe like, and then we've had like waves of immigrants coming in with their own religions, particularly lately. So that's another thought of like how America's changed recently. I think like the long term, you have lots of development as people get here, and then their own traditions develop over time. You get a distinctively American form of Protestantism that's different from Europe, which is a lot more institutionalized and formalized, like the Church of England, or even the Episcopal Church and the Lutheran Church in Germany. It's still highly ritualistic, highly formalized. There are a lot of people that are nominal, the Catholic Church, whereas like the kind of more like evangelical Pentecostal version of Christianity really took off in America, and it got exported around the world, and you find something unique about the way religion developed here. Yeah.
I should clarify that when I say set in the way, like America being set in its ways, I don't mean in a Judeo-Christian religion. I mean in the sense that we do have religious freedom. So any infringement upon that is immediately seen as an attack on our rights.
Yeah,
as
sure.
opposed to other countries where that's not necessarily the case. So
And
I
I think,
didn't mean like set in a religious way, just set. We don't have a religion.
and there are people, people that are Jewish by ancestry, and they, observe the big festivals. They do a Passover, but they aren't like practicing Jews. And there's people in Europe that celebrate Christmas that might be atheists, or have some sort of abstract belief in God too, and just enjoy it as a cultural festival. I suppose we're getting a little into the weeds here about this idea, but it's something to think critically about a religion and culture. Whether there's whether you should, and then compare the U.S. with other countries and look at like there's lots of countries that have majority beliefs where they have festivals and people just think, well, it's a festival. It's something we do that's a tradition. It just participating doesn't necessarily mean that you support the beliefs that the festival is based on, any more than you believe in Cupid if you're celebrating Valentine's Day, or you believe in Santa Claus for that matter, right? It's just it's something that people do to celebrate and spend time with family. And I think about it being an atheist on Thanksgiving, for example, just the holiday that went by, right? So do you have to believe in God to enjoy like a nice turkey dinner and time with family? And people talking about what they're grateful for, whether you believe in God or not. Oh, but this is an interesting question about I would say the reason why this pattern exists is because people don't think critically, and they don't think critically about religion in particular. And so people generally will just go along with how they've been raised and what their traditions are without questioning them. And that's the essence of critical thinking, is questioning the way you're raised, questioning the beliefs you had since you were a child, and thinking as an adult, well, okay, I was raised to believe these things, but are they really true? And to also take the extra step of not trying to read a bunch of books about why my religion is right and other people's religions are wrong. Mm-hmm. And certainly often people will do that. If you're a Christian, you'll get a bunch of books about why Christianity is a true religion, and then you'll satisfy yourself and quell your doubts about it. I've known lots of people who've done that. And it's a tempting thing to do, right? To read all the things that agree with you and to try to suppress doubts and get rid of that cognitive dissonance. But what you should do as a critical thinker, read all the books that trash your beliefs, mm-hmm. and see if they make valid points, and then read the other stuff and try to make an objective decision. Okay, let me come up to, now that we're done talking about politics, now to move on, or religion, time to move on to politics. Anybody have any uncomfortable conversations with relatives about these things? Okay. Critical thinking, 221. Okay, again, this is grist from my mill. So this is just a particular example that I found egregious. It's not a major thing, but it's See what you think about this. I think it speaks for itself. It's a short clip. This is CNN. President Trump went on an tour of Asia, talking with world leaders, and met with the Prime Minister of Japan. And they went out to feed fish at a koi pond. It's the tradition there. I'm not sure what this clapping in the background is.
Some guy just enthusiastically clapped.
Probably paid him.
Now watch President Trump, see what he does. You zoom in here. Oh, he dumps it all out. And the idea, there was a story about this, which is, oh, look at President Trump. He's instead of spooning out like he's supposed to, he just dumps the whole damn thing out. What an idiot was the story here. Let me just back up a little bit. And notice that. Okay.
Yeah, doesn't the other guy do it?
Let me just come back here. Notice the quick zoom there. Little laugh there.
Oh, yes.
That might have just been flashbulbs we're hearing. So there's the prime minister, and Trump's just like following the lead of the prime minister, dumping out the rest.
Oh.
They wave and they leave. Okay, there's my.
Trump's a demon.
Sorry.
Don't see that.
It's hard to find, like, one of the things about finding videos, it's hard to find stuff that doesn't have a lot of crap that's tacked onto it because everybody wants eyeballs. So what, let me call it my Star Words. So there's a good example of selective editing. Now, whether that was done intentionally or not, I have no idea. CNN and the president have had this feud going back and forth. But there was this meme all over the internet, and the idea was like, Trump's an idiot. He doesn't understand Japanese culture. He's a rube, and he's going there, and he's got this box of food, and you see the Japanese prime minister, spooning out the fish, and Trump's like that just dumps it out. And what a buffoon we have for president. And it's tweeted all over the internet. But then you look at the raw video, and you see he's just following the lead of the prime minister, doing the same thing. And the idea is that the news isn't necessarily. The news sometimes has an agenda, and so reporters have a narrative they want to push. Many reporters try to be objective and try to cover the news fairly, but reporters have political beliefs. They tend to skew left to center, and journalists and reporters are disproportionately Democrat and disproportionately liberal. And as you would expect, this comes out in reporting. Now, you get the same thing on like conservative news outlet sites. So there's an example of something I saw in. So there's a posting about a WikiLeaks article, which supposedly showed that all these Republicans, including Paul Ryan and I think Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, were all giving money to Democrats to try to squeeze out Trump or something. That they were sort of supporting Hillary over Trump to try to squeeze him out. And I looked at him like, this would be really interesting if there was like private emails back and forth from other Republicans that showed that they were trying to sabotage Trump basically and keep him from becoming president. So I saw on this posting on like social media, there's a story It's from this site called like Conservative Treehouse or something like that. And there's like 1 million comments below saying, oh, this is terrible, and Paul Ryan's got to go, blah, 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 right? So, and apparently I was the only one who went and looked at, like, they gave like a WikiLeaks number. I've been on the WikiLeaks site before. By the way, CNN like broadcast and said it was illegal to visit the WikiLeaks site, which is not true. So why would they say that? Well, maybe it's because they don't want you to look there. Or it could just be the journalist is ignorant. But they're putting it out there that you can't, if you go to WikiLeaks.org, that it's illegal for you to visit that site, which it's not. Anyway, so I go to the WikiLeaks site and I look up the number. They actually gave a number of the WikiLeaks, and the file not found. Okay, so I do some search strings for this supposed quotes from this conservative website. Nothing shows up. It's fake news, right? Nobody checked it out. There's like 100. There was over 100 comments there. Nobody went and checked it out, even though it said, "Oh, this is a WikiLeaks." So you can go on the WikiLeaks and read the WikiLeaks, and so I posted it was fake news. I probably wasted my time by talking to the website. I sent them an email. I said, I can't find where this is from. Maybe you could point me in the right direction. Where'd you get this from? And no response. So it's not like it's a partisan thing necessarily. One issue where it becomes so is you look at the disproportionate amount of mainstream media sources that tilt to the left. It makes it that way, and when people have an axe to grind, it's more likely to be a left-wing axe because there's more left-wing reporters than right-wing reporters. I gave you some stats on the links for this week on the number of liberal versus conservative reporters or Republicans, particularly when it comes to Washington coverage. So you look at the people that cover the White House, over 90%. So those who gave money to a candidate, over 90% is going to Hillary, right? So and I think over 90% of people are registered. Well, so here's what's happened with party registration. So it used to be, I think the number of journalists who are registered Republicans is like 7% or something like that. But you have this huge growth in independents, people that consider themselves independent. So the Democrat group has grown a little bit. The independent group has grown hugely. Republican is whittled down from maybe 25% down to 7%. And so the big growth is in independents. But you survey those independents, and they tend to be pretty liberal. They just don't want to identify as Democrat. And partly to give the appearance of objectivity, I think. Partly because people are pissed off at both parties and dissatisfied with the two-party system. So thoughts about that, about Coygate. Is a little thing, right? But I think it's representative of the sorts of thing that can sort of get out there with selective editing and how you can feed into a narrative.
That's the exact reason I stopped looking at Facebook and all the news sources. I mean, it sucks to not know about things, but does it suck enough that I don't see any fake news anymore?
Yeah. And this fake news has been like kind of a mantra. Let me, this idea of like, what is fake news?
I never heard the term fake news until the day after the election.
You tried to.
And then suddenly it was everywhere.
Yeah. And now so the fake news was started out as kind of like a liberal term used to tar like sites like Conservative Treehouse that are putting out like crap, and stuff that's, the conspiracy stuff and also like just intentionally creating false stories to get eyeballs and maybe to push a ideological narrative and maybe both. So you see these sensationalistic stories with no basis in fact, and the idea it's clickbait, right? And the more people that click, the more money you make from your advertisers. But then things get turned around and people point to this Coygate thing or other things that are reported that look like by mainstream media sources that to turn out to be, if not hoax stories, like case of selective editing or things that are sort of orchestrated or organized. Like the Christiane Amanpour was caught organizing like a Muslims Against Terrorism protest. And there's a bunch of people like on the street in London, I think it is, and they're zoomed in really close, and you see all these people with signs and wearing hijabs and holding signs saying, we're against terrorism and so on. And you're like, oh, that's nice, And then some behind-the-scenes photos come out, and you see there's like a whole film group. There's people with lights, and there's like, and they're like, and you can see like footage behind where there's, okay, stand over here, okay, move over here. It's like they're taking a group photo. And you see like the street is deserted, and it's like a really small group of protesters, and nobody is there at this protest. There's maybe 15 people holding signs, but they frame it to make it look as this huge number of people. And it's made to push a narrative, Muslims oppose terrorism, and here's a spontaneous protest that came out, and we just happened to be there, and we're shooting it. Yeah.
I was gonna say they did the same thing on the Hillary campaign. They like super zoomed in on her on a podium and showed like a small crowd.
Oh, yep.
People. They zoomed out and it's only 15 people.
Yeah. So I mean that is often something that can be done with crowds. Is when there's a small crowd, you show the podium and you don't show the crowd. Also, when there's a big crowd, you don't want people to know that there's a huge spillover crowd. You don't show the crowd, and sometimes that's another thing. And then you put out estimates that lowball the number of people there to make it look like that candidate doesn't have any traction. So here, a couple of things. So you have, first there's like a incentive for sensational stories. That get clicks. So here, for basically just people trying to make a quick buck, right? So the more, and this is the fake news is like, Justin Bieber got stabbed or whatever, or what's happened to, such and such a star, or you won't believe, fill in the blank, right? You've probably seen all these banner ads, that tell you something that's, and then it turns out that it's, they're kind of playing fast and loose with the truth, or it's misleading in some way, but you clicked it, right? So, and as soon as you click that, somebody's making money. So there's always an incentive to exaggerate, to sensationalize, or even to fabricate things for people to click on the stories, and that's, and that you might say that's legitimate, like. That's a legitimate problem. And Facebook and Twitter and some of these groups are trying to fight against that by having algorithms that sort of like bury fake news sites. They're just trying to make a buck and putting out stuff that has no basis in fact for money. But the problem is, how do you tell that from like sites that you just disagree with, or sites that or what happens when CNN puts out fake news, or what happens when it's another like mainstream news site that gets stung because they run with some press release. The other thing that happens is so there's this ideology, and people want to push their ideology, and this sometimes goes straight from the top. There's these guys, Project Veritas. They're kind of like rabble-rousers, conservative group. They went under cover at CNN, and they have the CNN producer, and they're asking, well, what's about all this Russia stuff? He's like, it's all bullshit. He's like, he's like, yeah, I guess it's mostly bullshit, but and it's like, but why is like all the time it's like the Russia, and he's like, it's ratings, and he talks about being in a meeting with like the the top brass there, and they said, now we're off. I forget what the story was. He's like, okay, now this story's pretty much played us out back to Russia, right? So this is like coming from the top. It's because CNN has a certain demographic audience, and they've gone from a more centrist position to a more liberal position, and part of this is because of like Fox News. So there's and part of this is a business decision, right? So it's CNN has moved from like the center to the left. And why? Well, it's because Fox News is operating this position here, and so they want to distinguish themselves, and so they're, in some ways, they're playing to their audience. In other ways, the people there are all liberal, and they all hate Trump, and Trump, hasn't done anything to ingratiate himself to them, right? So there's this kind of pissing match between the two of them. So that's another reason why reporters are used to a certain amount of deference from political figures, because the idea is that you can be ruined if you piss off the wrong people. But Trump doesn't care because he's got his Twitter account, right? So, and I think it just in general he doesn't care. So, and he just recently announced a contest, like who's the fakest news, and he's going to hand out like a fake news trophy to the group that's the most unfair to your favorite president, as he put it. So, and that's just Trump style. So, but you think about this as these are businesses, right? They're going after customers, and they have a customer base, and this idea, who's our target customer? And so you have CNN is going over more liberal people, although also not going too far to the left. MSNBC has staked out a position like on the far left, and is a little more left wing than CNN is. And you look at so there's like this idea of niches and target audiences, and it's important to keep this in mind when you're thinking about news outlets. And then you have like talk radio. Why is there conservative talk radio? Where's the liberal talk radio? Why did Air America fail? This is on the AM. Why is it on the AM band? Anybody have any ideas about this? Actually, let that hang in the air because I want to go way past our break. So let's take 10. We'll talk about this when we come back. Okay, and we're back.
No.
So,
Talk about that, I apologize.
oh, so what do you think about, like, so why is it that on the AM band, you had suddenly in the 1980s, you had all these talk radio shows come up with Rush Limbaugh being sort of the pioneer. Talk radio existed beforehand. You had like Larry King was on there, and you had some other people, Morton Downey Jr. But
Michael Savage.
he was actually, he came out in like the mid-90s, I think, early to mid-90s. So, so really like Rush is kind of like the first, and now you have this huge talk radio on the AM band. It's all conservative. They tried to air America, and finally they got some funding. They started treating it like a nonprofit, and finally it just went under, and didn't work. So why is it there's all these radical right wingers, Rush, Hannity, Savage, Alex Jones? They're all over the AM dial, and there's no where's liberal radio? Yeah.
Does it have to do with the range or where these things are popular, maybe? Like region?
No, it's actually, nationwide, there's talk radio all over the place. Even San Francisco has like 2 AM talk stations, and Michael Savage lives in San Francisco, and he broadcasts on the local AM station there, and it got like a conservative lineup. They have like KGO, which is more, actually KGO is one of the examples of a case where you have a kind of a mix of things. And KUGN here in town has a mix of things and more across the spectrum, where the other station tends to be more just straight conservative. Well, so one thing that happens, you had deregulation of the airwaves. So it used to be there was an equal time rule. So if you stated opinion on the radio, you had to invite somebody of an opposing position to give a contrary view. So you can imagine what would that do for opinion radio, right? Every time the guy says something, then somebody's going to sue you and say, I have a right to come on there and give a contrary opinion. So, so during the Reagan era, they deregulated that and said, look, it's the station owner gets to decide the content, and this sort of this equal time rule was untenable and was squelching free speech, which it was. And so, but why conservative speech? Well, it's because every other outlet tilted to the left to one extent or another, right? So ABC, NBC, CBS, those are the 3 big networks when I was growing up. That was all there was, and they were all some stripe of liberal. NPR is really, liberal progressive. It's supported by the government, less so today, but PBS, right? So the TV and radio networks were all liberal. And so there's this big niche here that's being unfilled about, maybe the more or less half the country that isn't having their views represented. So they all flock to AM radio, and then Rush's proof of concept, you get a bunch of copycats, you get market share, and then pretty soon it's like it's an institutional niche. And so people sort of get acculturated to the idea that this is where you find conservative opinions. You find them on talk radio. You start listening to Rush. You listen to the station. You listen to some other people, and pretty soon you're like an AM radio junkie. And so that's sort of how these things happen. And you get things. There are lots of lots of other sort of cultural things that people get accustomed to, and in business or in personal habits that it's just sort of like things that get specialized, and then you get a niche, and then it sort of sticks around unless there's some big social change. So now as a critical thinker, what do you want to do? So well, first of all, be aware of biases. That's one thing you want to do. And not just the biases of the things you're listening to, but your own biases. But be aware of the biases. So know, okay, I'm listening to a conservative show. So it's likely it's giving me a conservative opinion. And maybe I want to get another opinion on this before I make up my mind about it. So it might be, it's not just intentionally, person's like just lying to me. But it could be they're giving me a slanted opinion, so maybe I want to turn on NPR and hear them talk about the same story, right? Maybe, and so I would say consume a variety of news sources, especially say those that disagree with you, that who come from a viewpoint with which you disagree. So if you have political beliefs of some kind, you should expose yourself to news sources which hold contrary ideological opinion. I'll just put for shorthand those with which you disagree. It's not that you disagree with the news, but that like where you have opinion, the opinion is contrary to the political opinion you hold. So if you're more conservative, listen to NPR, watch MSNBC, maybe some CNN to get a feeling for what they're saying. Watch the major network news. If you're more liberal, turn on the AM dial and check out one of the AM hosts like Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity, or get on the internet and look at Breitbart, look at National Review Online, or look at some a site you disagree with. And the idea is that if you look at a bunch of different news sources, you can kind of find where maybe bias creeps in, and you get a balance on the other side, and you can make up your own mind. And then there are sort of you want to prioritize. I don't know if my numbering is going straight. Maybe I don't want a number there. Prioritize neutral. I'll put these in quotes, sites. And also, so this would be like, and I say this with like a ton of qualifiers. Because again, I would say like Associated Press. UPI, United Press International, Reuters. Reuters is a little bigger. Now, it's not to say that these can be totally trusted. And then also like local news too, it's good. Like if there's some local story that's got international play, it's always good to look at local news. And if you can see something that's got like a video, that's good. Or pictures or something like that. I know you can lie with all these things. Like the video is a good example. But if you look at a lot of different sources, you can see, well, is everybody saying the same thing? And then you can sort of make a judgment. If there's a difference, you can try to see like which group seems to have the most going for it, like as in the way they see things. And then also look at international news too. And international coverage. So you have like sites, like Britain has this publication called the Daily Mail. It's been around forever, and it covers a lot of American news, but it covers it from like a British perspective. It's similar to the U.S. perspective, but you get some differences. You could look at Daily Mail, Russia Today. See what the Russians are saying about it. Al Jazeera, right? So there's like lots of sites. I think the Al Jazeera English went down the tubes. But you can look at like international news sites, and many of them are published in English. There's China, the news in China. I forget what it's called. It's like the Chinese News Agency or something. It's got a really generic name. So if you see what like other people in other countries are saying about the U.S., it gives you some perspective and understanding. And the idea is if you consume a variety of sources, you're going to get a more balanced idea. Human nature, and this again is like non-critical thinking, is you look at only sites you agree with. and you and don't ever look at sites you disagree with. So thoughts on this? What do you think about? Am I missing anything here, or is there a reason to look at only sites you agree with?
You definitely should look at opposing news sites, but I have a question about NPR, actually.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what that is. I don't know what NPR is.
So National Public Radio.
Yeah.
So it's like
okay, so
the
it's
college
radio.
actually has an NPR affiliate, right? So this is, and something to think about, like NPR too. This is like government radio, right? This is, you know, a national people's radio. And some of the shows, and then you have PBS is Public Broadcasting System. That's a TV. Public Broadcasting System. But they're both they're both like originally funded almost entirely by the government. Now they've got lots of sponsors, and the Congress has pulled funding with them, in part because you know, Republicans in Congress say, first of all, this isn't a basic function of government. Second of all, it's ideologically skewed, and has you know, it's the skew comes again from journalists being predominantly liberal, and also from NPR sort of institutionalized, having a kind of institutionalized liberal bias in it.
Who founded NPR?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure I could tell you.
Because I wonder, like, what the party was.
Well, it's been around for a while. It was founded when the Democrats were in control of Congress and had vast majorities. It's only that the Republicans were like out in the wilderness for 40 years until they took over the House in 1992. This is like 1994. 2 years in the Clinton presidency. So like for decades, Democrats had, you know, since from Roosevelt to Reagan, you know, the Democrats were running the show. You had Nixon in there in the 70s for a couple of years, and I suppose a abbreviated Ford presidency. But even then, when you had the Republicans in the control of the presidency, the Congress was all Democrat. You know, not all, but you know, they had majorities in both houses. And now things are flipped, and so over time, there's budget constraints, and there's just the idea that this isn't a basic function of government, and also that these people are biased against conservatives, and so you get gradual erosion of funding. But a part of it is if you start out, you know, you have kind of like a liberal bias. It's really hard to get rid of those things because who does the hiring? You know, who sets up the programming? And then you get you get an audience, and people have certain expectations. Now, I've talked to people here at the college who say things like, well, I like NPR because it's like right down the middle, right? So anybody that would say that, you know, their idea where the middle isn't like where most people's idea where the middle is, as far as like the left-right spectrum. So so this is something to think about when you think about, and you can just turn it on, and typically, and I suppose if I was a drinking man, I could play a drinking game. Let's see what's on NPR. I turn it on the weekends, and it's always about like some disadvantaged victim group. It's usually about race, or it's about immigration, or it's about the environment. And those are like the three things they hit really hard. And that's what like liberal people like to hear stories about that. Or there's something about evil corporations. And that's like all the shows, you know, apart from Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me and the Prairie Home Companion. That's like pretty much what it is on the commentary shows. And, you know, or they'll have like a, you know, retrospective on Ukrainian banjo music or something, right? That's like stuff that would never fly in a commercial arena, but you can put on NPR because you don't have to worry about selling ad space. You're just, you know, getting corporate handouts, and your listenership is sort of locked in. Will take whatever you like as long as you don't say anything nice about the president. You know, people will keep on listening. So that's something to take into consideration. And so if you want kind of like an establishment, government, progressive view, not maybe if you want like the far left thing, you go for Jefferson Public Radio is a little more radical, or you go onto Alternet or something like that and find like, way far on the left. But if you want like a progressive, liberal, mainstream, progressive liberal view, and you tune in NPR. You want a right-wing equivalent, you turn on Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or something. And if you want something down the middle, it's really hard to find anything. CNN used to sort of stake out that middle ground, but again, they're competing with Fox News, who got like a huge market share of the cable business. And so now, because Fox has staked out the ground on sort of the right, CNN's moved to the left, and it might be more to it, but it seems like that's a big reason for it. Other thoughts about like sources of media?
I mean, now that we have phones in our pockets and everyone has phones, news can be spread around so much quicker. So I mean, just those tiny little stories are able to produce like much more revenue than they used to.
Yep.
And so that makes it even more important to have those cutthroat type stories, those basically like clickbait.
Yeah, so you look at like, blogs and websites. Like look for, you want to look for verification, because sometimes they can get, if they have like unknown sources, our sources in the administration, you think, is this small potatoes guy running a website, is he likely to have any, an insider in the White House? Because it takes a lot of resources to gather news. So you want to look for verification, look for like backup in the form of like, in the form of what they still call these wire services, or traditional media. Often what blogs do, and again, this is like people trying to make money too, so how can I get eyeballs on my blog? Well, I'm going to read like this is the way, so here's how news works typically, right? You have these big newspapers, primarily for political news anyway, the New York Times and the Washington Post. They're at the top of the heap. They write stories, and then people that do cable news will pick up these stories and report on them. And then you get the wire services will come out with stuff like that. And basically, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the wire services like Associated Press or Reuters, and that's pretty much like what people talk about. And then maybe, it filters out to these other news outlets, and then cable news is sort of second. And cable news doesn't do a lot of original reporting. But they, do interviews and cover press conferences and so on. But it's a lot of the stories are coming out of these major newspapers and filter into these cable news outlets, and then out to the internet and all over the place. So you look at a site like Drudge, it's just a news aggregator site. It just has like a bunch of news stories from all these media outlets, and Drudge puts the ones, and he goes for sensational headlines and tries to find the story with the most bite because he wants to get the most hits. And I think he has things that he prioritizes and things he thinks are important. He's trying to spread an ideological message to a certain extent. And it's not all political news. Sometimes it's just like weird and wacky stuff, right? But the blogs and the news aggregator sites, they're just going on the basis of this material too. So whenever you see a blog post or a news aggregator site, if it doesn't take you to one of these sort of mainstream news sources, you can be a little skeptical about it, right? What's the basis of the story? Now, if they interviewed somebody in person, then that's probably good. If they have video of a person speaking, that's even better, right? But you got to be suspicious, and I wanted to I called up this fake WikiLeaks story. Let me see if I can get this up here. And this isn't to say that mainstream news sources don't make mistakes either. That's why it's important to consume a variety of sources. So you can use CNN as a foil for Fox News. And even, look at the president's tweets, see what he's saying. See if he really said anything that's outrageous. Like, here's another example. I hate to sound like I'm a Trump apologist, but I think he's a good example of a person who's beat up in the news, sometimes for things that that he did do and sometimes for things that he didn't do. But because there's this animosity between Trump and the press, in part because, caused by Trump, right? Because, I mean, Trump actually, not only he antagonizes the news on purpose, I think. And so you take that into account. You think, okay, you're a reporter at CNN. Trump says you are very fake news. He your guys don't get to sit in the front of the room anymore. They're in the back and something, and Trump doesn't give you the deference and respect you're used to having. Well, you're probably kind of pissed off. And if you didn't like him beforehand, you definitely don't like him now. So when you're thinking about doing a story about him, how are you gonna play it? Well, probably in a way that doesn't reflect well on him. So that's something to take into account. And so here, but here's one that was it was just based on Republicans. So I was just going to talk about another story that there's this idea going around the election that Trump made fun of a disabled person. Anybody remember that?
Yeah.
So Trump was, he's making fun of this reporter, and he's kind of going waving his arms around, and the idea is then they show this reporter he was talking about, and this guy who's got a neurological disease like MS.
Yeah, you should know.
And people think, oh, this is so terrible, and so the headline is Trump's making fun of a disabled person. So now, in a certain respect, it's true. In a certain respect, it's not true. Anybody remember what the story was about this, or behind this?
Didn't the guy report something unfavorable?
Yeah, he was slammed Trump. That's the reason Trump was making fun of him, is because the guy is Trump's basically the guy saying the guy's a hack, and he's attacking me for no reason, and he's like, I say something, and the guy's freaking out, and then he does this gesture.
So, guys.
Because Trump's Trump, and he's a millionaire with a billionaire, pardon me, with blue collar sensibilities and a sense of decorum, right? It's he's like a longshoreman or something like that as far as the things he says. So it turns out this guy is disabled, but Trump had no idea that he was. So he's got this disease, but Trump had never seen the guy. He didn't know who the guy was. And you look at it, Trump does this with other people too that don't have MS. So this is his I'm a goofy, crazy person. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm throwing a fit, basically. He was saying the guy was throwing a fit. I suppose you could say throwing a fit. It makes fun of people who have seizure disorder or something like that, but it seems like it's a stretch. But you have the idea of someone pitching a fit, right? And that's all Trump was doing. But because this guy happened to be disabled, the story goes out, Trump is making fun of this guy because he's disabled, which turned out not to be the case.
That's a perfect clip, yeah.
But you see that over and over and over again, and you see the video, and you see Trump going like this, right? And then you see some guy who's is obviously got some neurological issues, who's disabled, and there's Trump making fun of the disabled. What a terrible person.
Did you see the one about him drinking water?
I remember vaguely about that one.
He got a lot of, it was recently, he got a lot of backlash for it. He was
Drinking water?
Yeah, he just...
Oh, gulping it down as opposed to sipping it or something?
Not even that. He just did it in an interesting fashion, but it was funny, but they blew it way out of proportion. They made fun of him and stuff like that, but it was it wasn't that big of a deal. I don't know, you'd have to watch it. When you watch it, it's pretty cool.
So sometimes people will say things knowing they're false, but often people will just pick up things because somebody else said them, and they'll just pass them along. They'll say, oh, it's terrible, without looking into the details. And there are examples of conservatives doing this to liberal targets as well. So sick Hillary, I suppose. I mean, Hillary was sick, right? And she did collapse at the 9/11 memorial. And turns out that actually the head of the DNC wrote in her biography she's thinking about replacing her because it was, they wasn't sure whether she could make it or not. But she had pneumonia, right? So it's it's an infection. She didn't have any serious health problems. She didn't have some sort of disease she was trying to hide. She had pneumonia because she was pushing herself too far after getting the flu. But you have all these conspiracy sites talking about, hashtag sick Hillary, and this idea, what's wrong with Hillary Clinton, and is she fit to be president? And people talk about, FDR in his wheelchair, trying to cover the fact that he's disabled, and even who is it? Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover actually, he had to have some operation. He snuck away and disappeared and went out, and they did it like in a boat to try to hide the fact that he had to have this operation. I think it was Hoover. So I mean, there are lots of, I have to double check. Don't quote me on that one. But there was a president who actually had a serious problem in the operation, but because he didn't want people to know, he took off and had an operation out of the boat in the middle of the night. But so I mean, you think about people people blow things out of proportion. Why? Well, people think if you don't want people to vote for Hillary, you spread the idea that she's too sick and feeble to be president. Go with the strong, virile, 70-year-old who's doing 3 events a day. Let me just, I'm going to call it this.
Did you, by chance, see his most recent thing with the Navajo?
Oh, so Pocahontas, yeah. So that's a good case too. So, so Elizabeth Warren has been claiming to be Native American. She's checks the box, right? And as you know, they're preferential treatment to people of Native ancestry. It's one of the protected affirmative action categories: African American, Asian Pacific Islander, Hispanic, and Native American. And so there's the four categories, and women is also another one. But so she's checking this box, and she makes the claim that she's called on it. So what does she do? She tells this listing of law students, right? So there's this association for law schools, and she does that, and law schools are under pressure to hire minorities, and so Native Americans are actually few and far between. They're a very small minority and even smaller minority of Native Americans who are going into law. So Harvard Law School sees, Native American, hire her, right? And a woman, right? You kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? So that's the idea. And so you look at Elizabeth Warren, she doesn't look Native American. I'm more Native American than Elizabeth Warren is. And she says, well, my grandma told me, and I have high cheekbones. And that's sort of her defense for claiming Native ancestry. And she claims, and she's her claim now is this is what she claims. She's a 32nd Cherokee, right? That's her Native ancestry. I've never, when I've had to check a box, I've never checked the Native American box. I suppose I could have, if I got called on, I think it'd be really embarrassing to explain, well, this little bit, my great-great-grandfather was an Indian or something, and I'm so people are making fun of her to use this claim, which hasn't been verified, and she has no documents or any support for it, that this idea that this woman who looks obviously white and not Native at all is claiming Native ancestry to advance her career, to get into Harvard Law, to get professorships, to get ahead. So people joke, and they call her Pocahontas, just like a fake Indian, right? Or the other name, Pocahontas, with F-A-U-X, right? Pocahontas. And people doing photoshops of pictures of her with a Cherokee headdress, photoshopped onto her head, and it makes for a great laugh. And this has been all over the internet. So Trump gets a chance to. He's giving away awards to these Native American, they're Navajo code talkers, and so that's their the code talkers, so this is like an unbreakable code because only a certain number of Navajo Indians exist in the world, and they're only in the American Southwest, and there's very few of them. So the government had this great idea that during World War II, we'll use the Navajo language as a code to send messages back and forth. So they're recognized and being honored at this event. And Trump brings up he says, yeah, we have. I hear we have one of you in the Senate, Elizabeth Warren. They call her Pocahontas. And using this, just thumb in the eye to Elizabeth Warren. But then what's the narrative that you hear on the news? I know for you to listen to the news. Oh, Trump's a racist, right? He's using an Indian slur. Pocahontas was named a historical person. I suppose that the reason it's a joke is because Pocahontas is sort of like the quintessential Indian. It's an Indian name people have heard about, right? It's a Disney movie and yada yada. So the idea is that Trump's poking fun at Elizabeth Warren for falsely claiming to be an Indian. He's not making fun of Native Americans. So that's sort of the gag. But then what's the narrative in the media, and you can watch all the cable news shows, CNN, MSNBC, is Trump's a racist, Trump has racist views about Native Americans, and isn't it terrible what he said? So then, and I'll say it's really easy to buy into that stuff, especially when you hate Trump already. And I have conservative friends, and they'd have there'd be some negative story about Obama, and they're willing to buy into whatever it is. Obama's a Muslim, he's a stealth Muslim, or I don't remember what, all kinds of crazy stuff, and willing to believe. I'm trying to think of it, and maybe somebody else can come up with a good analog on the left wing side. So you get that all across the board. What's that?
Both parties suck.
Yeah. But and I'm not trying to. I'm using these examples in order to get you to see that, or at least to suggest to you that oftentimes there's the politics of outrage, there's the piling on, and then people just sort of pass things along, accept them uncritically without looking into the details, where things might not be as bad as they seem, or maybe a quote's taken out of context, and those sorts of things to take into account before you make up your mind.
I think the reason that fake news passes around so easily now is because it takes a lot of effort to look into sites, to look into information.
Yeah.
And even if you do look into it, that information could also be fake, and then you have to look into it even more. And so, based on the society that we have now, it's just, I need it now, I need it now, I need it now. I don't need to work to have that. So, no one really wants to work for information anymore. And so,
what you did with the wiki site, going on and no one does.
That
never
blew my
heard someone
mind.
doing
It
that.
takes
I was
forever.
really impressed that you did that.
Oh, thank you.
I emailed them and everything.
And remember, let me come back to W.K. Clifford, right? So remember, he says, if you don't have time he said, you might say, well, but looking at having sufficient evidence is so much work. It takes so much time. And he says, if you don't have the time to look into the evidence, you don't have the time to believe. And so you should. And sometimes I see something I can't figure out whether it's good or not, and I'm like, I guess I'm not gonna share that. I have to look into it if I have time. Otherwise, I just let it fall by the wayside. Quotes are really like this too. So many. I see all these quotes attributed to Socrates. I'm like, Socrates didn't say that. I know the works of Plato. I read Xenophon. That's not something Socrates. And the style just shows you that's obviously not something Socrates would say. And so you get people that are misattribute quotes and pass things on. So it's always important to think about, well, what's the source on this? Is it any good? I just wanted to call up that sort just for balance here.
Something that I've really seen in terms of having a high end of ignorance is actually the my parents' generation and Facebook and social media in general. Just because they weren't really born in the era where you realize that a lot of that is fake news, and we kind of know because we've been around it, our whole lives, kind of what to expect. But plus, they kind of get caught up in the idea that everything on there is shared by their friends.
Oh yeah.
And it must be real because it's not some corporation shoving it down their throat. It's
Right.
It's their aunt. You know what I mean? It's
Well, Aunt
their
Bessie thought
cousin.
this was good. If that's good enough for me, and Aunt Bessie just got it from some other person that got it from another person that they didn't even know. Yeah.
Exactly.
Seems like it also comes from like just a fear of being wrong and embarrassed. Like it got so far to the point where there's a picture of like a 6 or a 9, whatever, where there's people standing on two ends. And the thing is, just because I'm wrong, just because you're right doesn't mean I'm wrong.
Mm.
And I feel like that's really dangerous. Like no, there's like a contradiction can't be true. It's either a 6 or a 9. Instead of bickering or claiming to be both, have a valid point. Search further, find out who put the 6 or 9 there, and find out what it originally was.
Yeah.
So it seems like everyone's just afraid of being wrong, and they'll just support it, even though they won't go after the facts themselves, because the facts in this case are irrelevant.
So I got stung by one. I'll cop to this. So there's a guy who's claimed that he was stabbed because he's wearing a red MAGA hat. And you read, and there actually have been people, and including what's her name, Blair White. Blair White's like the sort of like a what's the word I'm looking for? A contrarian. So she's transgender Trump supporter, and was walking down in West Hollywood, a street in West Hollywood, wearing a red MAGA shirt, a red MAGA hat to see what Make America Great Again. Wearing one of those pro-Trump hat, right? To see what would happen. And she had like someone threw like alcohol in her face, and she got like knocked to the ground and got like a black eye. Right, so and you see lots of stuff like this about people, getting beat in the streets, and by angry mobs, and you're like, well, I could believe that, right? So this guy says some guy came up to him and stabbed him because he's wearing a red MAGA hat. Well, it turns out the guy accidentally stabbed himself, and then made a false police report about it. So I guess he's got a knife and somehow screwed up and hurt himself, right? And sorry. No, I conflated these two things. So, I apologize. Let me step back for a minute. So, the Blair White got assaulted because she's wearing the MAGA hat in West Hollywood. This guy, he had like one of those two-tone. I don't know what you call it, one of those haircuts that's like stubbly in the bottom and sort of longer than the top.
Yeah.
That's associated with neo-Nazis. What's it called?
Upcut.
There's a name for it. It's not like
It's associated with Nazis.
It's not. It's this idea that if it's like short around the sides and sort of longer on the top, kind of like a bowl cut or something like that.
Like
Yeah.
an extremely popular.
Yeah.
haircut.
So it's a popular haircut, and it's not associated with Nazis necessarily. So although some white supremacist punks might have that, I suppose, the same way you'd shave your head. So that's the guy that stabbed himself. He said, somebody stabbed me because they said I had a Nazi haircut. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's terrible. And I share it right now. And it turns out somebody calls me on it. This is a great thing about the internet, too, is that you tweet something out and somebody says, oh, Borrowdale, I can't believe you got stung by this story. I'm like, oh, you're right. People are getting insulted, but that's not one of the guys. So you cop to it, and you say mea culpa, and you be more careful the next time. And so there's lots of stuff like that out there. And the thing is, people will, there's a case, you read a story about, a woman that says that she was, some evil Trump supporters yelled at her bus and tore off her hijab, right? Because they said, go back to your own country. And it turns out that she's out late, seeing a boy, as a very traditional Muslim father, and told her the story. Father contacted the police, and she has to lie to cover it up because she's worried about being punished, and finally breaks down and says she was lying. But nobody ever sees the correction if it's printed, right? They just see the story. So you can get all kinds of different stories and here it's kind of hard because it's not really fake news. It's a person making a false claim, and it's shoddy journalism, or it's people anxious to be first. So there's this big pressure to be first. There's always deadlines. People are writing on deadline. They're competing. And so early stories tend to be have inaccuracies in them. And so that a lot gets lost in the shuffle. So there's another example. A really egregious example is this. There was a rape story printed in Rolling Stone that was later retracted. And it was somebody with an agenda, but there was also a person making up a story. And there you might just say that your reporters make mistakes, or you might say they should have known, I suppose. And that's that's you always take into account, like if you're reading something in Rolling Stone, it's likely to be a sort of, have a liberal perspective. And if it's about some liberal cause like sexual assault on campus, that maybe you want to look at with a skeptical eye. In the same way, if you read something in a conservative publication about the sins of the Democrats, be a little more suspect. So here's a good example. So WikiLeaks, Clinton bribed 6 Republicans to destroy Trump. There's a picture of Julian Assange. That's the WikiLeaks guy, right? Okay, so far so good. In an email from John Podesta to Houmet Abedin. So John Podesta, WikiLeaks did get his emails because John Podesta's password was password, and because he got a phishing attempt and clicked on it. So I don't know if that counts as hacking or not.
Like, they're just breaking into people's emails. And
Well, so it's illegal it's illegal to hack somebody's email,
Yeah.
but it's not illegal to publish the emails. So.
figure, okay.
So, Conservative Daily Post, so I apologize, official retraction, it wasn't Conservative Treehouse, it was Conservative Daily Post. And so here's the email sent this year, describes how funds were diverted from Clinton's campaign to the super PACs of Jeb Bush, Carly Fiorina, and John Kasich. According to the email, JB, that's Jeb Bush, Carly Fiorina, and John Kasich, will be noticeably silent for the rest of the campaign. This is John Podesta, who's Hillary's campaign manager, talking. They'll be silent for the rest of the campaign. And remember, all these guys, these people are running against Hillary. Or sorry, they're running against Trump in the primaries for the Republican nomination. So it says each will receive a significant allowance from advertising budget. HRC is in the loop and has talked to all 3 personally, eyes only, right? And this is supposed to be from the WikiLeaks. And there's a story about it, blah, 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 and more commentary.
But how do you know any of that is true?
Oh, well, let's see. What was the Conservative Daily Post? That's a news site, right? So maybe I don't know about the New World Order Report, .me, but, maybe I don't trust them, but maybe I should trust Conservative Daily Post.
Like anybody could have just written that and then just put some quotes around it and then said that they said that. And
Okay.
any news site could do that.
See, here's the advertising, sure, on Facebook and Twitter that wants to send me notifications of new stories there. And like here, I think, well, okay, there's a bunch of pictures. Oh, there's the email, right? Pantsuit Mafia, blah, blah. Okay, and then the question is like where this email was days before, blah, blah. Circumstantial evidence. And I think like where's like a link to something else?
Yeah.
Where is there? So, and here there was another story that actually had, you see all these ads on the side there? It's like, ooh, somebody's gonna click on this one, right?
Do you see the advertisement if you scroll up? With Hillary? Maybe one of
The Hillary one. So, so one of the in one of the ads here, they in one of the iterations of the story, they actually listed like a code number for the WikiLeaks, and so I searched the code number. I ran like this email. You look at you just search this as a string, right? If you're looking in WikiLeaks, you can search for any string of characters. It's very search friendly. Now I gotta find where it is. Well, heck. There it is. So here's the email. This is supposedly an email. It's in quotes, right? So I can just take this and I can copy and I can go to WikiLeaks.org. This is what I did, right? I'm like, that's interesting. Search keywords. I'll just put that in there. I might have to have fewer keywords. Oops. Add PCs. And you can just, so this is like, you know, how much work is this to do, right? You can just Google something. It's fairly easy to do. Okay, and then I get, you know, the advanced search, and it doesn't find anything. And if I broke it up into phrases there, it still wouldn't find anything. After a while, I'm like, well, it's not there. Like I should get hits on some of these, you know, some of these, even though there's typos in there, I ought to get some hits, and there's nothing. So I could take out the quotes. So the idea is that if you see something that looks iffy, just Google it and see what comes up. And you know, if Snopes comes up, or urban legends, or
Why does it matter what WikiLeaks says?
so WikiLeaks actually.
Or what makes them more right?
It's an org, dude. Oregon Go. You know, what decides.
So so what, you know, this is a good question about what makes WikiLeaks reliable.
Or
Well,
any of them.
one thing is that, so WikiLeaks is, you know, it's a particular organization that's made, you know, made its name by publishing, you know, secret material the government's trying to keep secret, and the people whose stuff comes out don't say that it's their stuff. So that's like one of the proofs that if this stuff were actionable, people would sue them for libel or other things. Oh, that's all.